Okay, so what I'm going to talk a little bit about today is the phonaestheme GL as has been introduced, and to what extent English native speakers are aware of it having some meaning connection with the idea of light. So to start off with, let's define exactly what a phonaestheme is, and to do that we need to consider the context out of which they arose. Now, phonaestheme is a term coined by the linguist J.R. Firth in 1930, and it arose from the context of his idea of prosodies. Now, for Firth, a prosody is any functional unit of sound that is not abstracted to what he saw as the problematic level of the phoneme. Firth was dissatisfied by the idea of phoneme inasmuch as he was more convinced by the fact that what we might consider meaningful linguistic units of sound were extended beyond sort of individual discrete phonemes. So, for instance, things like the syllable, that was, he said, a prosody because that was a meaningful unit of sound at a greater level than what we might consider phoneme, and similarly the intonation system. So for Firth, a syllable was a product of a number of different features. The minimal feature was what he called the nucleus. And optionally, it could have an onset and a coda. So, my computer is frozen. Please don't do this to me. Okay, so taking a word analysed as a series of prosodies, you can see that a single syllabic word in English, gleam, is for Firth a combination of the E nucleus preceded by the GL, what he called onset, and then the M final coda. So for Firth, a phonaestheme arose when one of these prosodies, either the onset, nucleus, or coda, took on a cumulative suggestive value. So by that he meant a connotation, by virtue of the fact that it recurred in a range of English words with a broadly similar meaning component in their denotations. That is, he says, speakers hear and learn to make these sounds in what may be described as particular contexts of experience. And then that therefore endows those sounds with some sort of connotative value. So onset GL is probably the most widely cited of all English phonaesthemes, yet ironically it's one of the phonaesthemes that Firth doesn't actually talk about in any detail. However, it has been subject to a lot of discussion post-Firth, particularly by scholars Marquand in 1966 and Sadowski in 2001. And they all argued that in English, the most common meaning denoted by words with onset GL is that of light, or semantically related ideas. And a number of scholars subsume the idea of sight into this as well, on the basis that light is a prerequisite for sight. In other words, if you don't have light, you can't see. So just how frequently recurring is this phonaestheme? Well, taking aside inflections and derivations, of the 59 head lexemes beginning with GL in the compact OED, 19 of them denote a meaning related to light. So that equates to roughly 32%. And those are listed there at the bottom. The most commonly cited as exemplifying the phonaestheme are gleam, glimmer, glint, glisten, glitter, and glow. But you can see that it's not just the presence of light, but also the absence of light. It's the whole idea of light is what's connected with the GL cluster. For example, gloaming, which is twilight, gloom, obviously the absence of light, and glaucoma, which I don't know if anybody knows is a sight condition which prevents light from getting to the eye. Okay, so crucially, phonaesthemes are not onomatopoeic in that they do not mime their sound, purely because, for example, GL cannot mime. Light is not an idea that can be mimed through sound. Nor are they iconic, inasmuch as there seems no reason why onset GL has the connection with light as opposed to any other onset English onset cluster. You know, it could have been STR, for example, or GR, but there's no real reason why it necessarily had to be GL. And nor are they universal. So the fact is that because they arise from patterns in common to forms of denotation, and obviously each language has its own forms by which to denote concepts, then in theory each language should have its own phonaesthemes. Nor, of course, do they raise a challenge to the Saussurean paradigm of arbitrariness, inasmuch as I say, there is nothing any more suitable about GL to make it used to denote light than any other onset. However, they are diachronically non-arbitrary. So in other words, you might have a form that is initially arbitrary, but over time becomes more suitable. So for example, once one GL word has become used for light, by process of analogy, any new words could become used for light and they would have GL as their onset. So the problem is that all the existing studies into the GL phonaestheme are what we might term theoretical, in that they look at the existing vocabulary of a language, usually English, and they calculate, just as I did at the start, how many of the GL onset words denote a meaning of light. However, this is not necessarily sufficient grounds to conclude that a GL phonaestheme does actually exist, because if you remember, phonaesthemes as defined by Firth involve speakers ascribing some connotation to a prosody. So, in the words of Jespersen in 1922, it is the suggestiveness of these sounds as felt by present-day speakers that must be taken into account, and no study to date addresses the GL phonaestheme from this perspective. So, that leads to one research question. Do native English speakers connote the meaning light more frequently than any other meaning from words beginning with onset GL, such as the findings of the dictionary would suggest? To answer this research question, I used a methodology which involved primarily 3 experiments, and these were given to a cohort of 30 native English speakers in the form of an online survey. The experiments took their cues from the only other investigation to date that has looked into phonaesthemes productively, and that was Ablin's study into Swedish phonaesthemes in 1999. 2 of the 3 experiments are closed-ended, and they use multiple choice questions, and 1 is fully open-ended. So in the first experiment, respondents are provided with audio recordings of 3 coined, what we might call nonsense words, and 1 image. So the image depicts, in this case, glittering on reflected sparkles of light, and only 1 of the nonsense words features the onset GL. The other 2 feature different onsets, however, the nuclei and coda of each coined word is identical to the others, to control for any sort of extraneous phonaesthetic effects from these prosodies. Obviously, you have to use coined words in this type of experiment because you have to control for any sort of meaning effect from established words in the lexicon. So basically, respondents are asked to listen to the audio recordings and choose whichever they feel is the most appropriate to name a specified part of the content in the image. So in other words, listen to the coined words, which do you think is most appropriate to name the part that emits the light? And the idea is, if the GL phonaestheme is recognised by speakers, then the respondent should show a degree of preference for the GL onset word over any others to name the content in the image, on the basis that this is the only phonetic dimension on which it varies from the other words. So this is the actual question. I'm not sure how well it shows up on this projector, but this is the actual question I used. It's a screenshot of the online survey. So you can see at the top, the image is a close-up, thank you, of a heavily made-up female eye, and the eyeshadow is particularly glittering and sparkly. That's great.
I think we shouldn't do it. We could actually, it will prevent us from taking a video or shooting a video.
Okay. And then the three sort of grey bars underneath are actually the embedded audio of the coined words. And then respondents are invited to listen to them as many times as they wish, and then choose one of them to give the eyeshadow a new name. Obviously, I had to be very careful to not use a GL word in the question because I didn't want to prime speakers in any way. Okay, and for the sake of completeness, the phonemic transcriptions of the coined words used are there. So you can see it's only the onset on which they vary, and the other two onsets were chosen completely at random. Okay, experiment 2 is designed to provide a retest effectively for experiment 1, and ostensibly it's the same experimental process except it's in reverse. So now we have 3 images and a single coined word. The coined word features the GL onset plus a randomly chosen nucleus encoder, but crucially the nucleus encoder are different from that used in experiment 1, and only one of the images depicts a meaning associated with light. This is again a screenshot of the actual question from the survey. And participants are invited to listen to the made-up word as many times as they wish and choose which image they think it fits best. So image 1 is a picture of a fashion model in a parade. Image 2 is a tree against a background of stars and a very bright sort of solar flare, if you like, in the middle. And then image 3 is just a car picture. So image 1 and 2 were specifically chosen on the basis that it supposedly will be image 2, the idea of the light being emitted by both the stars and the sun behind, that will be matched with the GL word. But also, image 1 was included to see if there was any effect of the idea of glamour in the attribution as well. So which was stronger? Did the light play out over this other related semantic field of glamour? And again, as you can see, there's a phonemic transcription of the coined word, and it used a different nucleus encoder from experiment 1. Okay. Experiment 3, finally, was a fully open-ended test. Respondents were provided with a definition relating to the emission of light and asked to invent any word of their choosing to name this definition. So the idea is that if the GL phonaestheme is recognised by speakers, respondents should prefer coining words with onset GL to any other English onset. And for the sake of completeness, this is the actual definition that was given from the survey. Okay. So let's have a look at some results. Well, in experiment 1, 25 of the 30 English speakers, so that's 83%, preferred using the GL word to name the glittering eyeshadow. No respondent used onset PL, and 5 used onset FL. In experiment 2, the findings are even more marked, where 27 of the 30 English speakers, so 90%, attributed the glittering stars image to the GL word. Nobody chose the image of the car, and only 3 people chose the fashion model. So if there is an effect for glamour and glam, it's certainly not as marked by any degree as the association with light. And in experiment 3, 12 of the 30 respondents coined a word beginning with GL in response to the definition. Now, although that's only 40%, given that it was completely open-ended and in English there are at least 81 possible word onsets, the fact that 40 respondents all selected the same onset, when in theory they had a 1 in 81 chance of choosing it, seems particularly high. And as you can see, these are all the onsets that were used in response to this question, and the disproportion for GL is clearly evident. The next most frequently used onset only had 3 speakers in contrast to 12. So there does appear to be an additional finding in these results, and that is that the phonaesthetic effect of GL could be affected by the vowel with which it is paired. So in other words, by the vowel in the succeeding nucleus. Experiment 2, as you'll remember, sees a slight increase over experiment 1 in the number of speakers associating GL to light. It was found that 90% did in experiment 2, in contrast to 83% in experiment 1. Now, experiments 1 and 2 use coined GL words that are phonetically identical other than their vowel nuclei. So it was gless in experiment 1 with a mid-front vowel, and gliss in experiment 2 with a high-front vowel. And there is further evidence that respondents may well prefer GL plus a high-front vowel to attribute to the meaning of light. So insofar as the vowel graphemes in experiment 3 can be interpreted, because obviously English is particularly bad in having a grapheme-phoneme correspondence, we can see these were the actual words that were coined in experiment 3. And of these, 7 have some sort of high vowel. It's not necessarily clear with some of them whether it's a high front vowel or just a high vowel, on the basis that they're disyllabic, and it's not clear whether, for example, with the 6th word down, if it's G-L-I-S-S and then the syllable break, or if it's G-L-I-S and then the syllable break. If it was double S, then we know from the orthography that the vowel has to be E. If it was single S and then the syllable break, the vowel could be E. But nevertheless, 7 of the 12 feature a high vowel of some description. So therefore, in conclusion, yes, GL is consistently and strongly associated with light by native English speakers across all the experiments, and this shows evidence that they do recognise its phonaesthetic function. However, it does appear that it may be affected by the vowel with which it is paired. It appears that it might be stronger when it's paired with a high front vowel, although this warrants further research. But it does appear to support the idea from Jespersen that in many languages a high front vowel tends to be associated with lightness and a low back vowel tends to be associated with darkness. And that's me.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Questions? Okay, you're welcome.
The experiments involve the same informants or different universities?
Exactly the same informants. The experiments were actually testing 12 English onsets for phonaesthesia. So the online survey put all 12 questions to the same cohort of 30 respondents. It's just that they were mixed up at random in an attempt to try and sort of, for no speaker to recognise the pattern of what was being tested. But yes, all the same respondents.
Mm-hmm.
As far as the last question, we had people said their own answer, asking to name the including of our offspring. But in English, we already have words for this. I think gleaming and listening. Do you feel like these existing words might be biased to the results that you found?
Yes, it's possible, but I mean that's to an extent the whole idea of phonaesthemes is that the existing words are used as a model, and it's the disproportions in existing words that will map onto the use of those sounds in subsequent words. So the fact that you have glittering, gleaming, glistening, they all begin with GL. So if the coined word that they used began with GL, on some dimension they must have recognised that we have a number of words with that meaning component that have that feature in common.
I guess what I mean is maybe instead of asking about far-off stars, because this is, I think, one of the very few ways besides twinkle that we would use to describe them. But if you used something that listed like the light of an airplane or something, which is usually associated with listening, gleam, or glimmer.
Sure.
Or even to be more abstract, right? Even something a bit weirder, just so that there's no association already built in, but with the...
Yeah, no, definitely. I mean, it's always... I couldn't make it too abstract because I wanted to be quite specific on what I was asking people to look for. And obviously I had to make sure I didn't use a GL word in the definition because that would have primed. But yeah, I think that's a fair comment.
More questions? Comments? Thank you very much.
Thank you.